Good morning, everybody. I know it's right at 11 o'clock, but I'm going to give everybody just a couple more minutes to get on before we get started.
Morning. Kassie, how was your vacation? I said, how's your vacation? I think you're muted, but
I was muted. Thanks. It was good. It was busy. I don't know if you've ever been out there. It's not much of a vacation. It's a lot of driving, a lot of running because you try to make all the things.
where were you again?
We went to Mount Rushmore, Hill City, South Dakota area to do all the touristy things.
Nice. There's like a national park out there too, right? Something Hills or something like that.
Well, there's Custer State Park. And that was really neat.
Gotcha.
Okay. So it's a couple minutes after. I'm sure we're still going to get people in here. This training, you guys, today is actually, I'm going to get a group kind of consensus on how you want this to be. We left it as, a buyer kind of consult, but I guess I'd like to hear from the group. Are you wanting to really more focus on conversations that you're having with buyers upon initial meeting? Second conversations, would you prefer to go over buyer rep documents? Ultimately we want you walking away from this feeling like you actually got something out of it. So I'd love to hear from some of you on things that you would like to hear covered in this training. And if no one speaks up, I will spend the next hour boring you to details about, I don't know, my kid's first day back at school.
I guess for me.
Ooh,
sorry, you go
Go
first,
ahead.
whoever's talking.
I was just gonna say at some point, can you kind of just go over your spiel for agency form? I just want to make sure I'm saying what I say right.
Sure. Yep. I know that that's a good one. And that's one that gets a lot of people stumped. Alexa, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I agree with Jennifer. That was great. The other thing is with the buyer's consultation, kind of like where those can kind of pop up. So like say that a home is unavailable and then you're like, oh gosh. And then you're like, oh, they seem like they want to talk about something more in depth before we book more stuff. Just kind of like where the buyer's consult like strategically will take place throughout like different people's personalities and stuff, if that makes sense. And like kind of how you navigate it, say like versus at a coffee shop versus if, you're just doing it Zoom, like over Zoom quick, do you do the exact same layout, kind of that stuff?
Sure. And Chris just posted in the chat too, our other people doing buyer consults at first appointment. And that's what's so hard about this, you guys, is because every meeting that you have with the buyer, the circumstances are different, right? Sometimes you have that first meeting and it's very clear that they're first time home buyers and they want more information and maybe they're willing to meet with you. And sometimes you can get them right from that first appointment. Hey, let's go down to the street and meet at this Caribou and sit down and actually work through what it looks like to purchase a home. I always tell my buyers, like, look, I am in this to educate first time home buyers. I really want to educate you on the home buying process, right? I want to make sure that you're making informed decisions and that you have a clear understanding of this entire process and how it works from the beginning at the stage that we're at, from just starting to look at homes all the way through the end to closing. And sometimes you just know right off the bat of meeting with the buyer that that's not something that they're going to be willing to just go to Caribou with you and do right after that first appointment. So sometimes it naturally happens throughout the actual first showing that you've met with them at that first property. Any of the agents who are on have any like insight that they want to add to that, or experience that they've had with that on, or answering Alexa on the like the timing of a buyer consult? And Chris, it's also hard for me to do chat and run the meeting as well. So if you're able to unmute and speak, that's a lot of times easier. But she's asking, are other people doing buyer consults at your first appointment, and how many in our group do them separately? Who wants to speak up on this?
I mean,
I'll
I've done it.
go. Oh, go ahead.
I've done it. The first thing I try to do, especially if I can't get that first appointment, like if the house is under contract, I just try to do it at the office. And then one thing that I've done that was really successful is I actually had Matt join me. So we were able to kind of do the 2-in-1 home buyers consultation. He was able to speak on like the lending side. He was able to get both their emails and all that stuff set up right there, and then even start the pre-approval process. So, and I just do it at the office too. If they're like, whether if it's in, if they're near here or they're near Excelsior. Yeah, that's just something that really worked for me, and it was really successful. And I know they appreciated that a lot. So.
Yeah, I think that's great, Jackson, especially getting the lender involved right off the bat, right? Because they're kind of not only getting hit from both angles, but they're starting to actually feel like they're starting this process and not just looking at homes. They're getting in deeper into the process. I think that's great. Jennifer, what were you going to add?
Yep, I started doing more of that now. Now that things are changing a little bit, and also I kind of read the room and see, what they're feeling. If I can tell that they're not going to do it that day, I kind of let it go that day. Tell them no pressure, let's connect soon. And then I just follow up. And then the next time I meet with them, I explain to them what the purpose of the agency, and buyer rep is, as far as, prioritizing their time. By having them sign that buyer rep, I can make sure that, hopefully I have enough time on a Friday, right? If 5 buyers, but if 4 buyers are coming to purchase a home that are under contract, they do get priority. And so when I put it in that way, that it's, to protect them. And so I think you really kind of have to read the room. Most of the time, mine happens during that initial, while we're walking through, kind of as we're walking through that first house, we've kind of gone over most of the stuff. And then I can bring up the form. So sometimes I'll tell them, save 10 or 15 minutes so we can go over a few things at the end.
Real quick, you guys, you might have just saw my eyes go big. We all got the notice that construction's going on at Apple Valley. There was a huge boom on the roof. So if you're hearing a lot of background noise from my end, that's where it's coming from. I wasn't expecting that crash, but I agree with Jennifer. I know personally how I operate. A lot of times my buyer consults are naturally happening as I'm kind of walking through the house, right? Kind of educating them and getting a feel for, are these the type of buyer that are going to want to sit down and do a formal meet, or is it kind of going to be more educating them on the fly as we go? So I feel like there's no one set great answer, Alexa, to that question. It's more just reading the room, like Jen said. Crystal, you have your hand.
Yeah, sorry, good morning. So I just have like one part that I'm struggling lately is, so like I naturally do them. I've never sat down and done like a buyer consult like separately at all. And maybe I should start that, but I feel like as the market shifted, I'm running into a lot of people who have like no clue about the pre-approval. So like yesterday, I drove all the way to St. Paul, South St. Paul, met with 2 clients. We had 2 showings scheduled. This was my first time meeting them. We had one conversation. She preferred the text. Okay, fine. So I thought I'll go do that. Then I get there and they say, well, actually these houses are too close together. We're not interested. And I said, okay, so do you want to still see the other homes since we're right here? Nope. But we did find 2 houses over in Hastings. Well, like I'm in Lakeville, so not a huge deal, but like now we just can't. So like, and then they haven't even spoken to a lender yet. So at that point, then I gave them, the information that they needed. But like I'm running into like, I'm doing a lot of driving and I'm spending a lot of time, but I'm working with a lot of people who aren't quite there. Like, and I don't know how to navigate around that. Like, how do I not waste so much time going out on all these showings when they haven't even thought about talking to a lender? And I know we're not supposed to ask that, like, are you pre-approved? But like for a $200,000 lead and I'm driving 30 minutes at a time to go show them 5 houses, like so maybe if we could touch on something or what people are doing, like I will take any advice.
So I've got a couple things on that. I wouldn't have asked them if they wanted to cancel the other 2. I would say the sellers have already prepped their home, for this showing and it's already approved. Let's go ahead and just go through them. I know you've said that the properties are too close together. However, there's a lot that happens during this whole showing process. It's me learning a lot about you and your wants and needs. So looking at homes isn't a complete waste of time. So twofold there, Crystal, right? You're still getting them through homes and it is giving you an opportunity to learn a little bit more about them, and get their feedback when they're going through the homes of what they like and what they don't like. But furthermore, they said the houses were too close together. How do they know that if they get in that home, they wouldn't be able to maybe overlook that objection based on the house meeting all of their other criteria?
Sure.
So in that case, I put it on the fact of the seller. Well, we already have these 2 scheduled. The seller has already prepped their home for the showing. Let's just go ahead and go through them. It's not going to be a complete waste of time. It gives me an opportunity to learn a little bit more about you and your likes and dislikes, and gives you a little bit of opportunity to learn a little bit more about me. Another thing, you guys, is don't hesitate to get Flex Mortgage in on, like Jackson did. Jackson did it more formally, does it more formally, like at the office. But if you're going to meet a buyer, and especially if you know that they've already indicated they're not pre-approved, call Matt or call in before your appointment and say, hey, I'm meeting this buyer. Would you be available for a phone call when I meet with them face to face, and try and get them on the phone? Jen, I know that's, when did she leave? Yeah, Jen, I
Yep.
see you have your hand up, and I know you have had some major success with this. So why don't you speak to that?
So one of the things I do right away, once I have that appointment made, I'll tell them when I'm making on that first Zillow call, I'll say, hey, let me go ahead and confirm with the sellers, and I'm going to give you a call back in 5 or 10 minutes. And then when I call them back at that 5 or 10 minute point, that's kind of where I get a little bit deeper into the woods, but not too deep, like 5, 10 minutes. Okay, great. I'll see you there. And then when I have somebody who does that, I'll say, hey, well, you know what? That's okay. Too close together, not a big deal. But even the no's are very educational. So let's head on inside, and see what we do like about the house, because in every house, there's probably something you like. And as we go through a few more, we can hopefully find the one that'll combine them all together. So I get them in there so that I can establish that trust, and do that route. And then when I can tell they haven't been pre-approved yet, or like yesterday I was on one and they're not pre-approved yet, so we talked about it a little bit, and I said, so here's what we're going to do this week. So I don't give them the option of if they're going to do it or not. I just tell them they're going to do it. So I'll say, here's what we're going to do this week. I'm going to connect you with the lender. I want you to, I'll have you guys connect. I'm going to check back in with you in 3 days. Once we can kind of see where we're at with our pre-approval, then we can go ahead and schedule some more showings. That way they feel like they're in the driver's seat, and yet I'm actually the one in the driver's seat. And so it's been flowing very nicely, and they're kind of seeing it. And I'll tell them, we don't want to go look at a BMW if we can't afford a BMW, or whatever it is, and kind of take some of that tension. That's my part where I can throw in a few jokes. All of a sudden now it's not all this, daunting, overwhelming stuff. And then they realize like, oh, she's really actually here to help. So you just kind of always have to be one step ahead of them, but in a very gentle yet proactive, productive way.
Yeah,
That's
and
how
to
I do it.
take that like maybe a little bit step further, or what I kind of do, Jen, good point about we don't want to look at a BMW if we can't look at a BMW. I do that both ways to people. Hey, we're looking at $250,000 house today. Maybe you find that you're only qualified up to 175, or conversely, maybe you find that you're actually qualified higher at the 350 to 400 price point. And then that's when it's kind of, you know, if you haven't spoke with a lender, this is really an opportunity to learn what you qualify for. And I explained to them, look, during this process, let the lender know where you want your payment to be. Don't necessarily go with what you're pre-approved at, right? You could be approved for $400,000, but maybe you only want a $1,400 mortgage payment, and that puts you more at this price point. This is the point where that lender is really going to help us dial in the price points that we should be looking at. Does anybody here use high note for
I
buyers?
was just about to bring that up after we got through that, but I've had really good feedback with high note.
Oops, I muted myself. Nate, are you willing to share your buyer? Like, do you have a high note presentation that you'd be willing to share, or would you rather I screen share mine and go into mine?
I haven't been into mine in like a week, and Hannah created like those new templates, and I'm actually sitting down today because I have a seller's listing consultation tomorrow. So I'm going to be like finalizing both my buyer and seller with those new slides. So, I mean, it looks
Yep.
older, but
Yeah,
guess-
and mine, from what she has sent out, I haven't updated it either, but I will bring you guys into mine.
Okay.
So I, a lot of times, sorry guys, let me try and get in here. We take the initial Zillow lead, right? And then we send the video to introduce ourselves. And then, actually, maybe I'll go into it this way. Forgive me, guys. I will typically send this. I just sent this to Angela. But then I will send them this link to my high note presentation. If I can get into it. Sorry, I'm trying to maneuver everything around here. No, I'm just doing it in the. So this is what my high note presentation looks like. And again, Nate already touched on the fact that Hannah has gotten some new slides and stuff, but I just go in and I edit the current one I have to just literally all I have to edit is their name. And then thank you for your time on the phone to discuss your upcoming home purchase. I put together some information you find helpful as we navigate through your home buying journey. And there's a roadmap that they can view, the importance of the pre-approval letter, and a link to the loan officer to get the pre-approval process started, understanding their mortgage, hiring an agent, and then I link it to my Zillow review page as well. What I like about this is those of you that have been on our high note presentations is that I get notifications on what people are looking at and how much time they're spending on it. So if they're really focusing on the buyer roadmap or the pre-approval letter, you know, it gives me a better idea of what's important to that buyer. You know, are they spending more time in the pre-approval area? Are they spending more time on the roadmap? Jen, I see you have your hand up again. Are you wanting to add in on this, or is it up from last time?
No, it's up from last time. Sorry. I'll put it down.
I don't know how to put that down. So I know that I went over that high note stuff really quick and high level because we've done other high note trainings, but if you're not utilizing it and some of you don't have an account yet, if you'd like one, we can get you one. But again, I take the Zillow phone call and then I send the video to them. And then afterwards I send this email. So that's 3 touch points to them already before I've even really met with them. Crystal, can we do a high note workshop day? I know that they've already done a few of them, but I can certainly, Hannah's on vacation this week. And I think in our YouTube channel, there's high note trainings. And also in high note itself, like for my presentation, I copied a template. And I just did some videos in the high note area myself. But yeah, if you want to shoot me a text message or a phone call or an email so I don't forget, I can see if Hannah can get something else on the calendar again. But I feel like they just did one a couple weeks ago. All right, before I forget to do this piece, well, does anybody have anything to add in or question up to this point? While I try and get agency open so I can kind of go through what my spiel is on that.
Can you make sure after you do that too, to do that, Nate, do you have that line that we were talking about yesterday? There's a new line on the buyer rep where it's like seller shall or seller shall not. Can you touch on that? Because I wasn't sure what the answer was yesterday.
Yeah, let me see what line it was.
Thanks. I might have it still.
So that was also something, because yeah, the forms changed on August 1. So I had kind of talked about all of those in a training, and I know it's hard to remember all this, or I did it in a team meeting. That line is actually really nice, Jen, because before the buyer rep agreement made the buyer feel like they were fully responsible for all the commission, because that's how the buyer rep reads, right? So that second paragraph that's been added into that, where you can check seller shall or shall not, what
Yeah,
that
that's what it
indicates
was.
is you're able to then explain to the buyer, look,
Perfect.
yes,
Okay.
you're responsible for this 2.7%, but I'm going to actually get that from the seller. The only way
Perfect.
to be responsible for this buyer is if you kind of ditched me, or you went and bought a FISBO or something along those lines. But as of right now, you know, here in the buyer rep agreement is where it indicates that I'm actually going to get my payment from the seller.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, I'm going to share my screen again so I can go into agency, and I will give you guys what I kind of go over. Just going to go into one of my transactions here. I think I could pretty much do this from memory, but I'd feel a little bit more confident just having the form in front of me. Okay, can you guys all see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so here's the agency form. I know you're all familiar with it. What I point out to people is, look, this is a disclosure only, not a contract for representation. The state of Minnesota requires me to go through this document with you. So again, it's not a contract for representation. You signing this is not requiring you to work with me or committing to me. It's a disclosure, and it's a disclosure that the state of Minnesota requires us to present to anybody we're working with upon substantial contact with them. Substantial contact is pretty much anything related to your finances, you know, the houses that you're looking at, etc. I'm going to pause for a moment because sometimes I do get buyers who go, well, I've met with other agents and they never presented this. I actually love when people say that to me, because my response immediately is, I'm really sorry that they didn't do what's required of them or their job and their licensing with the state of Minnesota. I value my license, and I don't want to be in trouble with the Department of Commerce. So I'm not going to be caught in a situation where I'm not following the rules that I'm to abide by being licensed here in the state of Minnesota. So
I
again,
got a listing that way.
yep. You can, because they're like, what? This agent never presented this to me. So again, I start with, this is a disclosure, not a contract for representation. The state of Minnesota just requires me to disclose to you the different types of representation there is in a real estate transaction. Okay. So the first one is the seller, and that agent represents the seller and what's in their best interest in a transaction. Then you have the buyer's agent, which would be me representing you in what's in your best interest in a transaction. Then you have something called dual agency. Dual agency doesn't necessarily mean that I am the one representing both you and the other party in the transaction. Dual agency can be anybody under the EXP umbrella, right? So if there's another EXP agent on the other side of the transaction, that is considered dual agency. And sorry, Steve came in here. I don't think he realized we were on a live training and being recorded. With dual agency, we cannot negotiate for the benefit or detriment of either party. So we're here to help guide you and give you the information and facts, but we cannot negotiate for the betterment or detriment of either side. Then facilitator, this is a true story. My neighbor was renting his house, and he is a auto mechanic, and the homeowner was a police officer. They came to me and already had all of the terms decided on the sale. My neighbor wanted to buy, the owner wanted to sell, and I just facilitated that transaction. So basically I just drafted the paperwork for them. I didn't provide any representation or fiduciary duties to either party. And then I go down here to our fiduciary duties, and I say it's loyalty, obedience, disclosure, confidentiality, reasonable care, and accounting. These are all pretty self-explanatory and kind of mean exactly what they sound. And then down here is just notice regarding predatory offender information. I can't provide predatory offender information on anybody in your area or areas you're wanting to move to. If you'd like more information, you can visit this site. So literally that took me, I mean, I got a little sidetracked because we were interrupted, but I would say that takes me less than 2 minutes to go through, and it's just an overview of it. Now, do you sometimes get people who want, stop me on something and ask for more information on specific things? Absolutely. But, overall, it's just kind of giving a high level review of the form.
So can I ask a question?
Yep, I have Cheryl here in the office, and so she's asking a question. Go ahead.
So, when I first started, there wasn't time to give this information ahead of time, and now there is, but not always. Like sometimes I'm getting a call from Zillow, and can I show this house in 2 hours? So
Yep.
When are you sharing this kind of information?
So she asked, when are you sharing this information? Again, you guys, a lot of times I have all the buyer rep forms and the agency and like my bio sheet in a folder. And the first time I'm meeting a buyer, like I'll say, hey, here's some paperwork for you. We'll discuss this later, but just some information to take along with you from this first appointment. Once we get into the house, like at some point, again, this is so hard to tell you when exactly to present this document. You have to read the room and you have to know when a good time is. A lot of times I can do it at the kitchen table. Like, hey, while we're here, let me just stop you. I need to go over some information with you. I'll go over agency with them, and then I'll give them the rest of the documents and say, eventually we're going to need to talk through a buyer representation document, what that means for you and for me in this relationship moving forward. But for now, I just want you to have the paperwork and the documents for you to review. That way you maybe have a better understanding of them when we sit down to actually discuss them.
Okay. Because up until this point, I've been bringing the selling guys, but not been bringing the documents. And I heard another agent say they bring the documents.
Yep.
So you would do that too.
Yep. How about anybody else? Anybody else have any?
I do it that way too. And then
Hand them a
I
folder.
try to get, yeah. And I try to get them to sign agency or decline, and I'll tell them, this is just a receipt for the state of Minnesota to indicate that we have in fact had a discussion about real estate. And then, here, take a look and we'll go over the rest of these later. That way they don't feel pressured, and they almost always sign it.
Yeah. So another thing is if I've had someone to refuse sign agency, then I ask them if they'll initial the bottom, and usually they will. And if they won't do that, I will literally take the form and at the bottom say presented to John and Jane Doe on 9/3/2022, refuse to sign. And I'll email that to them afterwards. Hey, just want to reiterate, we had a discussion on this document when we met today. I know you weren't comfortable signing anything, which is fine. I just want to send you a copy for your records. That way I'm covered. And again, sending them a copy of agency, whether they signed it or not, is another touch point for you after that meeting. All right. What else do you guys have? Any other questions, thoughts, scenarios you want to walk through? Nothing? Okay, Jackson, I'm gonna pick on you. Do you want to share one of your biggest success stories with buyer rep or agency, or meeting a buyer for the first time and getting them under buyer rep?
Yeah, I mean, actually, it was my most recent closing. They had been working with a few realtors before, and then they just were super frustrated with everyone that they had worked with because they just felt that everyone was unorganized. So that was one of those ones where I sat down. It was me and Matt. We were able to explain everything, go over all the documents. I don't actually have them sign it there. I always just let them know, like, hey, I'm just gonna e-sign this to you. It's much more organized that way. But they were super appreciative of me going through that whole thing with them. They felt super confident in kind of the next steps and throughout the home buying process, and we're actually able to get them under contract within like 5 houses. So yeah, they just felt that, super educated to that point, and we're ready to make a decision. So
That's awesome. So in this case, it actually like helped you to sit down and educate them. So they didn't, they were probably hitting Zillow buttons, getting connected with agents who were just opening doors, not taking the time to actually educate them on how the process worked.
yep.
And that's where a lot of those first meeting questions come from, right? I know, Crystal, you pointed on this before, and Jen's kind of touched on it, how like we don't want to ask a whole bunch of questions up front, but that's really what that first meeting's for. Once you get face to face with them, it's a lot easier to convert them and start having conversation with them than it is trying to do that before you meet with them, right? Because that kind of scares them away. Jen, how about you? You want to share a success story?
Hold on, I was running my phone. Yeah, my last one was with my listing, my Cottage Grove listing, actually, that's on the market now. When we sat down to go over those documents, agency was obviously the first one I pulled out. And I knew that they had met with somebody because they had the folder sitting there. And I said, well, you're probably already familiar with this form because I know you've met with somebody else. And they were like, oh, no, he just like dropped the folder and left it. And I was like, oh, well, here. And as soon as I said, this is actually required by law in the state of Minnesota for us to give this, they're like, oh, well, he just like threw it on the table and said he'd be back in a few days. And so I knew right there that I had it. I was like, well, you don't want to talk bad, right? So you kind of have to very nonchalantly do it. And in the end, I was like, well, here, we went over everything and said, when are you meeting with him again? And they were like, well, he's supposed to be back Tuesday morning. I said, great. I'm going to be back Tuesday afternoon at 3, and we'll go over any questions you have then. So that ended up, I was able to get it because they weren't really impressed with his lack of, explanations. So it works. You just really, really have to read the room to see, if they're not into it and they don't want to be pushed, but there's a fine line of when to be pushed and, when to push.
All right. Anybody else have any follow-up questions, follow-up scenarios that you'd like to walk through? Document?
I just have a general question. When you're like doing the home showing for the first time and it's like just someone from Zillow, how long do you usually like just kind of like hang out by the front door and ask like a few beginning questions? And then like how many questions do you kind of like ask throughout just to like how do you keep it all under tact? Because I feel like I'd get like, oh my gosh, what did they say with that one? Oh my goodness. Like, I don't know. Do you guys kind of get what I'm saying? Yeah, like how much do you kind of just like talk with them like, oh yeah, so like how brings you in? Yep, da 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 da. And then like, okay, let's continue on. So let's start upstairs. Like, what's your kind of spiel for that? I've seen your video, Cassie, but I want to hear like everyone's and everything.
Okay, so there she told you. She saw my video already of a mock showing. Who else?
I loved it, Cassie. I loved it though. Don't worry.
No, I know, but everyone has a different style for this. And that mock showing video on the training website, obviously it's not natural because we were acting and you can't cover every scenario. So who else wants to jump in here? Mike, we haven't heard from you. Ooh, did I call on him and he's not paying attention?
I was vaguely paying attention. I always take it kind of by circumstances, and it's always different depending on the client too, and kind of reading them. Obviously, with the disc, and each client's going to be different and how you want to approach it. I mean, there's definitely those people that you bring them in and immediately you kind of see that they're driven by certain things, and that's kind of how I usually start. Like if I can tell they're just more interested in the house, we kind of just start walking through the house. If you can tell that they're kind of driven by what the numbers are going to be or what the house has to offer, or just depending too, sometimes I'll get, you can tell they just want to know more about the process, and it all kind of depends. And so I'll take it as it comes, depending on what that client seems, but also kind of let them kind of guide right away too as to what's important to them and what they want to look at first.
Thanks, Mike. That helps a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Alexa, there's no like a one size fits all on that either, right? Because you're gonna have
Right.
some clients that show up at the door and they're very talkative and they're excited, and there's others that you couldn't read them and determine what they thought about the house, even if you tried. You know, and that's where you have to start asking questions. What do you think about this kitchen? What do you think about the location? Pointing things out. Are you looking for more of an open layout? How many bedrooms do you need? Just asking, I would say, normal real estate questions as you're walking through the house. Anything you can ask to gain a little bit more knowledge about the type of people they are and what their motivating factors are in buying.
Okay. So yeah, just basically like reading the room first and then asking questions kind of based on where they're at with things like what you read. That makes sense.
Right. All right. Anything else from anybody? No? All right. Well, thank you guys all for joining. We're going to stop this. You all get a 20-minute break, and we'll see you at noon for the team meeting.
Thanks so much,
Thanks,
Kassie.
Kassie.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.